Okay, we're continuing with the functions of mass communication. The next one in line is cultural transmission, the process of passing on culturally relevant knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values from person to person or group to group. I'm going to ask you this question, and I'm also going to ask you this question in our discussion board. And this question is this: who watches TV to learn about American values? Let's say it again. Who watches TV to learn about American values? That will be our discussion board today. Moving on to slide 11, and our last main function of mass communication is where, well, started in a big way. This is what got people to buy television sets: entertainment. Some people argue that what we transmit through mass communication encourages escapism instead of high art. I don't know about that necessarily. I have seen the Bolshoi Ballet, the Russian ballet. I have seen some orchestras play, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, Boston Pops. I think that the people who understand the ability of television to transmit events like these, they use TV like that. But of course, if we want to escape our lives, this is what women did for years. In the early days of television, they watched soap operas. When soap operas began, they were 15 minutes long, like The Edge of Night or As the World Turns. Then they slowly worked into a half hour, and then we ended up with 1 hour soap operas, and some of them at night. There are still a few on the air, but not many. We've kind of outgrown soap operas. Now we like, as our soap operas, we watch reality TV, and it is kind of a soap opera because so much of it is not real. The way we do this is often criticized for teaching consumerism and for promoting values that are not very good. Well, how do we promote consumerism? What is it within every television program that promotes consumerism? How do television shows stay on the air? They do that through selling bits of time on the air, and those commercials pay for the television. It allows the actors and actresses to be paid to produce content. So they're technically not making money off of the content, they're making money off of people selling things during the commercials. And that's what allows all this other stuff to be on there. All right, we go to 12, and I'm not going to expect you to memorize this. These are theories of communication that I don't think we really need to get into on the basis of what we're really trying to focus on in this course. We see that there is a route that our messages take. So we start over to on the left with the info source. This is the person who has a message. That person then takes that message and sends it on to a transmitter or a channel of some sort, which encodes it. So whatever wires our message goes through, or let's say maybe I'm standing on a stage in front of 1,000 people. I'm going to speak into a microphone. That microphone is going to amplify my voice and make it audible to those 1,000 people. So what I'm actually sending through that microphone is a signal. And then it becomes a noise source. And then the people in the audience receive the signal. If I have a bad microphone, they're not going to receive a very good signal. It might be scratchy, it might have too much interference in it. then the receiver, the person sitting in the audience, decodes my message. In other words, tries to figure out what it is that I'm trying to get across. What really is my message? And so then that message either comes straight to me and I figure it out, or I whisper to the person next to me, like I did a lot when my mother was getting older and couldn't hear. I'd say, oh, she said this and this. Okay, so we have a little ways to go from the original message to the person who receives it. And this is actually how it happens. You don't have to remember that this is called the Schramm-Osgood model. Okay? I won't ask you that. But I do want you to know that there are actually 7 parts to this model to show us how we really try to communicate. This is person to person. It's face to face. It is in person. Okay? So she has a message which she speaks to him through this channel in here. The straight double arrow is the channel, which is face-to-face in this case. He hears it, then he gives feedback, and they are within the situation, wherever that is. If it's in a cafeteria, if it's in a classroom, wherever this is. Now, if he's in a cafeteria, he's going to have a lot of interference, this jagged line down the center. There is almost always something that is trying to interfere with our ability to either send a message or receive a message. Sometimes I teach in class and I hear construction workers working outside. Outside the window I hear all of this equipment and it's loud and I can't think sometimes, or the students can't hear me and I have to speak up. So that's a form of interference. Here's another form of interference that you may not have thought about. Not necessarily noise outside, but what about you have a headache? If any of you have had a migraine, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say that you have a migraine and there's almost nothing else you can think about. So it's not a great time to make decisions. It's not a great time to be listening to ideas because you can't focus on anything but the terrible pain. What about milder pain? What if you haven't eaten? Since, let's say it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you skipped lunch. You're going to be hungry. Those hunger pangs are going to bother you. You're not going to be able to concentrate as well. You may be taking a test. You may not be able to do as well on the test. We have interference in our lives, and we have to learn how to deal with it. Schramm wrote, "It is misleading to think of the communication process as starting somewhere and ending somewhere. It is really endless." And that is so true. If I hang up the telephone, I then walk over and I talk to my husband and I tell my husband what I and this other person discuss on the telephone. It's really never ending because even if you hang up on the phone, you might have left the other person hanging with something. You didn't finish your thought or whatever. So it really is continuing. Cultural studies approach. I don't expect you to know all this much about it. I just want to tell you about it. We might discuss it later. It takes into account the symbolic environment created by mass media. A TV commercial can be a rich source of cultural codes that subtly or not so subtly tell us how we as members of society should act and think. Now, that had to do with the correlation part, and it had to do with cultural transmission part. James Carey said, "Communication is a symbolic process whereby reality is produced, maintained, repaired, and transformed. You begin to wonder, what is reality?" On some of these shows, you ask yourself, was that an instinctive response that he made, or was that scripted? I can't tell. I can't tell what's real and what's not real.